A Louisiana landlord is so frustrated with the pandemic eviction moratoriums that he created a new lease that said that tenants could still be evicted even if another one was implemented. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's really about the frustrations of one landlord down in Louisiana with the whole eviction moratorium nonsense. Okay, so what this landlord did was they actually wrote into their lease that, hey, if another eviction moratorium happens, then you will still allow me to evict you if for some reason you're unable to pay rent. Now, I don't know if this is going to fly. I don't know the landlord-tenant law in Louisiana, but it seems like they threw contract law out the door with all of the eviction moratorium stuff in the first place. So it doesn't matter what it says in your lease. It seems like they would just completely ignore your lease anyway and allow this tenant to stay regardless of whether they agreed to be evicted or not. Now, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, and maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think of this sort of situation, okay? Do you think that this sort of thing is possible? Do you think that this landlord will actually be able to evict these tenants from the property if another eviction moratorium were to occur? I personally don't believe that there's any legal standing, but I think that maybe what he's trying to do is convince the tenants that, hey, I have to leave, and they will leave of their, on their own if another eviction moratorium was to happen, not knowing that, hey, this contract doesn't really protect him. So this article, it's coming from WAFB.com, and it says, landlord hopes to reduce eviction moratoriums. And there's a little bit of a video in here, and I'll throw that video in right now so that you can see a little bit more about the story.
Gary Lewis Properties has apartments and condos across Metro Baton Rouge, including some of these units here along Acadian at Government. But if you agree to a certain provision in their leases, you might be signing away in an important right. We showed the new lease to law professor Chris Odene.
I candidly am a little surprised that any landlord, particularly in Louisiana, would be able to find an attorney to draft a provision like this without that attorney having to tell them, you should know that it's almost 100% that this is not going to be enforced.
All right, so let's get into the article and see what it says. A Baton Rouge company that leases apartments and condos is asking certain tenants to agree that they can still be evicted even if there's another eviction moratorium in the future. In exchange for paying a lower lease amount each month, tenants would give the company the right to evict them regardless of whether the government issues another ban on certain evictions, as it did in 2021 during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, yeah, it sounds like this landlord is saying, hey, if you agree that if for some reason you're unable to pay the rent, if the government somehow is able to implement another eviction moratorium, then you also will then agree to leave. And you don't have to sign this contract, but you don't have to necessarily live in my building either. Now, it sounds great, but like I said, I really don't know if this is legally enforceable. I feel like it's more just a scare tactic for the tenant, maybe somebody who doesn't know very much about the law, and they're just like, oh, well, we did sign this, so I guess we have to leave, not realizing that, hey, those eviction protections still cover you. Now, I can't remember exactly how long the state of Louisiana or the city of Baton Rouge, I don't know what the specifics were on their local and state eviction moratoriums, but in terms of the CDC one, I don't see another one like that ever happening again. Okay, so the tenants wouldn't have anything to worry about. They would have. The landlord wouldn't have anything to worry about in that situation. Now, obviously, the state is another story completely, and so is the local jurisdiction. So many local jurisdictions have put in their own eviction protections that landlords, even in predominantly landlord-friendly conservative states, were still getting screwed over. I've heard about, like, even in Texas, there's I believe there's still local eviction moratoriums in Dallas. And I was like, really? It surprised me, okay? But nothing should be too surprising, but it blows my mind that they even allow it at the state level when this is known to be a much more landlord-friendly state, and then the local governments are throwing these anti-landlord laws up there and these pro-tenant laws, and they're just screwing us over. So I see why this landlord is trying to do this. I really just doubt that it's enforceable, Louisiana native and University of Iowa College of Law professor Chris Audinet says the agreement proposed by Gary Lewis Properties might have a hard time passing legal muster. I'm candidly a little surprised that any landlord, particularly in Louisiana, would be able to find an attorney to draft a provision like this without that attorney having to tell them, you should know that it's almost 100% certain that this is not going to be enforceable, Audinet said. The law professor says there are many provisions in the law, particularly Louisiana law, where landlords are not allowed to entice tenants to sign away certain rights, even if tenants do so willingly. Yeah, and I'm not a lawyer, but I figure that's the case as well. Now, but here's the thing, right? We already know that, hey, the president of the United States likes to, try to pass rules and regulations that are not lawful, that they're unconstitutional. So, hey, why can't we do it too? Because their goal was just to entice us to do what we wanted, whether it was legal or not. So maybe this landlord is thinking the same thing. Like, well, I know that this isn't legal. I know he probably didn't even go to a lawyer to write it into the lease contract. Probably just wrote it himself in there. And just thinking, hey, maybe the tenants will just leave on their own. But if they don't leave on their own, then they still would be protected. But at least I was able to get rid of a few extra of them who weren't paying. It's a pre-event waiver, Audinet said. I want you to waive away rights that you may have in the future arising from, in this case, a pandemic or some other public health emergency. And you can see that if the law allowed landlords to do this with tenants, that it would seriously undermine the ability of public health officials to act quickly and to act responsibly in the future when there is something like a public health emergency. Well, I personally don't believe that the public health emergency should allow them to just void all contracts, go against the Constitution, and just do whatever they want. We lose all freedoms and all rights, according to this lawyer, because there's a public health emergency. Well, guess what? Now, you lose all your rights. No, that's not the way this works. So I understand why the landlord is fighting this, but at the same time, I don't believe it's legally enforceable. Many landlords across the country suffered monetary losses during the moratorium. They still had bills to pay, despite, in some cases, a drastic reduction in the amount of rent they were collecting. Tara Berthelot, a manager for Gary Lewis Properties, issued a statement explaining why they made the change to some of their lease agreements. We are a small business, and we pay for all items we purchase at local stores, Berthelot said. We just provide a different product and have to meet our costs to provide it. Yeah, and that's the truth, okay? Landlords are small businesses. We have to be able to pay our bills, and them just coming up and just saying, well, you can't evict this person. This person doesn't have to pay rent anymore. That's not fair, okay? It's period. It's just not fair. And, like I've said, I believe it's unconstitutional as well. A violation of the Fifth Amendment, but they don't see it that way. They think that they can just strip us of our property rights, void our contracts. I really want to go into the whole contract law thing more, but I just don't know enough about it in order to make a very thorough video that makes me sound knowledgeable. So that's for someone else. So you might want to look somewhere else. But when it comes down to it, when we have a written agreement. Okay, we have this written agreement with this tenant. I agree to pay X amount by X date. And then, they don't do that. And the government, they basically void our contract. And, then we say, okay, well, the tenant can only live here for a year. But then the government says, no, you have to keep them there longer for a year. You see, basically our contracts are useless in that kind of situation where the government steps in. And, I don't know exactly why they think that this stuff is, legal or legitimate, but I don't agree. Okay, so editor's note. Professor Audinot's research specializes in commercial consumer finance and property law with an emphasis on mortgage lending, digital assets, and financial regulation. His work has appeared in leading law reviews, and he is a co-author on several case books dealing with real estate and commercial transactions. Yeah, and I agree with him. This probably isn't something that would be legal, okay? I don't agree with him on the fact that, hey, the public health authority has the right to void your contracts. Okay, I'll never agree with that. Or the public health authority can basically throw your rights out the window whenever they feel like it. That's just not the way it works. Okay, so yeah, I don't think this is legal. I really don't. I don't think this contract is legal. But like I said before, if the landlord is able to convince the tenants to leave on their own, or convince them to continue paying, and not stop paying their rent because they don't believe the eviction moratorium applies to them, then that's good. That's good for the landlord. And I'm all for it.